There is something deeply primordial about caves, these strange spaces that allow us to move inside the earth. So it's hardly surprising that they're often considered the entrance to the underworld, or that they become places to hide things. Caves are understandably replete with stories of treasure, lost graves, and hidden booty. Now, earlier in the week, I asked people what their favourite cave-based stories were, so I've chosen some legends in this episode based on the answers. Sawney Bean was particularly popular. Now, the stories assembled here tell tales of people on the run, seeking shelter, burying treasure, and yes, brownies. One story even explores the popular notion in English folklore that the intervention of the devil can explain the topography of an area. So grab a cuppa, settle in, and let's explore some of the legends associated with British caves in this week's episode of Fabulous Folklore. Hello there and welcome to Fabulous Folklore, the podcast for all things folklore, occult and just a bit weird. I'm your host Icy Sedgwick, blogger, fantasy author and your guide into these rather mysterious realms. I've got some rare things to show you, so come on in, take a look around, but be careful not to touch anything. These things sometimes bite. Well, hello there and welcome back to Fabulous Folklore with me, your host Icy Sedgwick. We are finishing Subterranean Month with the folklore of caves, and this is a massive topic, it really is. And first of all, I had to try and decide where was I going to look at the cave stories from, and was I going to stick to the British Isles, was I going to go further afield, etc, etc. And I've basically decided to narrow it down as much best I can because it's only a 15-minute episode. And it does mean that obviously I've got space to come back and explore these things in future. And to be honest with you, that's the case for pretty much all of the subterranean folklore because there are other things that I could have explored for each of these areas. So yes, I probably will revisit them for like a part 2 sometime next year because we didn't even get on to mines yet and they're just absolutely bursting with weird stories. So there will be another subterranean folklore month sometime next year. So I should also point out for this episode that I am more or less prioritising England and Scotland mostly because they were the stories that people came back to me with on Twitter, but it does of course mean that I can cover Ireland and Wales in future episodes as well. And I'm also not including man-made caverns, which rules out the likes of the Hellfire Caves and Chislehurst Caves, basically because I had to narrow it down somehow, so I figured again that can be a separate episode at some point. And I did debate at one point actually doing the Caves of Drac on Mallorca, which I have been to, and they are amazing, but I thought it looked a little bit strange suddenly having this one story that was outside of Britain when the rest of them are in England and Scotland. So I thought I'll probably do like an international one at some point because as one person pointed out, the Bell Witch is associated with a cave in North America. So, you know, there's quite a lot of other things that I can have a look at some point in Subterranean Folklore Month Part 2, which will be sometime in 2023. But we're going to start off with the legend of Sawney Bean, which I was really quite surprised was probably the story mentioned most often when I simply said on Twitter, what are some of your favourite cave stories? There are slight variations in the legend depending on where you hear it and where you are, so I'm just going to see if I can cover as many variations as I can. But in general, Sawney Bean's real name was believed to have been Alexander Bean, and he was born in East Lothian in either the 15th or 16th century. After discovering a life of honest work didn't suit him, he formed a relationship with a woman named Black Agnes Douglas, and they took to a life of crime, based in Benane Cave in Ayrshire. Now, this particular cave was supposed to stretch really far back into the cliff face. Some of the sources said it was like 200 metres back into the rock face, which would make it absolutely massive if that were the case, and it had tunnels and passages and all that kind of jazz. But more importantly, it was cut off at high tide, which meant that they could essentially live undisturbed for 25 years. They had 14 children and 32 grandchildren, many of the latter being produced through incest between their children. And they supported their vast family by robbing, murdering and cannibalising passers-by. Now, locals were apparently aware of a huge number of people going missing, but for years the Bean family avoided capture because nobody believed anyone could live in the cave, and in the absence of any other locations, people just didn't really know what was going on. Now, eventually, as the story goes, the family tried to attack a married couple riding home from a fair. Now, the husband actually managed to hold the clan at bay by riding his horse into the clan, although other versions also say that he held them at bay with a pistol and sword. But the problem was they did actually manage to kill his wife. Now, a group of fairgoers appeared, and since they outnumbered the Beans, the cannibal family actually fled. Now, the fairgoers took the husband to the local magistrate. In some stories, this was the chief magistrate of Glasgow, and the husband told about everything that had happened in this particular incident. Now, finally, the king found out about the encounter and ordered a thorough search of the area by 400 men. Some people suggest this was James VI of Scotland, James I of England himself, and that he actually led the search party, although Dr. Louise Yeoman notes that if this were the case, James would have mentioned it himself on more than one occasion. Now, apparently, the search party took bloodhounds with them and they managed to discover the cave, and two different legends exist as to what happened. In one version, the search party actually captured the family alive in their cave, surrounded by human body parts and their ill-gotten gains from the victims. The family was apparently executed without trial, and that was the end of them. In the other version, the search party actually laced the entrance of the cave with gunpowder and left them to suffocate inside after blasting the cave closed. Now, there is some debate as to whether or not any of this actually happened, and Dr. Yeoman points out that the stories only emerge over 100 years after the event supposedly took place. The fact that no one can agree when it took place also does make the whole thing rather suspicious. Some people think that there may have been a combination of stories rolled together to create the legend, but Dr. Yeoman also pointed out that the books that told the story appeared in England, not Scotland, during a period of prejudice against the Scots. And this helps to explain the use of the name Sawney, used as shorthand for the stereotype of a barbaric Scot. When we bear all of this in mind, it does therefore then become a little bit difficult to take the legend as being absolute fact. It could have indeed been an example of bad propaganda in an attempt to push an English agenda. Basically, we'll never really know one way or the other, but Sawney Bean and his cave have become somewhat legendary. Though there is a far less bloodthirsty story which is associated with Scottish folklore that was also popular on Twitter, which is why I'm including it here. And this is the story of Robert Bruce and the Spider. Now, there is a natural cave known as the King's Cave on the west coast of Arran in Scotland, and according to legend, after Robert Bruce's first year as the King of the Scots went badly, he took refuge in the cave. Now, throughout the winter of 1306, he watched a spider repeatedly try to spin a web in the cave, and it didn't give up, always trying again when it fell off the wall. As the story goes, this inspired Bruce to renew his efforts, and he later beat the English in quite a decisive victory at Bannockburn in 1314. Now, Ian M. Rose points out that there's no clear evidence that Bruce ever spent time in the cave, but that said, he did end up continually on the move after his defeat, so it is actually possible that he hid here. The problem, however, is the fact that the story was originally written about Sir James Douglas, and the link with Robert Bruce came later. Dr. Louise Yeoman points out that Bruce apparently hid with Christina McRory, and she gave him men and ships to try again with another attempt at being King of the Scots, so we should probably credit her influence rather than the spider. And we're going to move now from kings to saints, and we're going to have a look at Cuddy's cave in Northumberland. And yes, I'm including this because at least it's relatively local. But two different caves in Northumberland lay claim to an association with St Cuthbert, the somewhat exceptional 7th century monk. The cave is sometimes known as Cuddy's cave, with Cuddy being what Northumbrians called Cuthbert. Now, according to legend, the Lindisfarne monks carried St Cuthbert's body away from the remote island in AD 875 when the Danes laid waste to Lindisfarne. Now, they actually wandered the region for around 7 years to guard Cuthbert's remains, and they apparently rested at Cuddy's cave as they roamed. Other legends actually say that the saint himself used to stay here when he was Bishop of Lindisfarne and toured his diocese. But as I say, there are two different caves that lay claim to being this particular cave that had been used by the monks and St Cuthbert. And one contender can be found in the Kyloe Hills between Lowick and Belford, and this one's in the woods, and a rocky outcrop forms the natural cave which offers shelter for actually quite a few people. Now, the Leather family from Middleton Hall also used the cave as a graveyard, so the land is actually consecrated as well, and memorials to the family still exist on the rocks near the cave. Now, there is no direct evidence to prove that this is Cuddy's cave, but the amount of space would actually suggest that it could have been used to shelter a group of monks. But sadly, in 2021, the National Trust had to close the cave after someone tagged it with white spray paint and a fire damaged the sandstone wall. Now, the second cave lies on Doddington Moor near Wooler, and this one's really quite small, having been enlarged at some point artificially, although there were apparently Neolithic cup and ring markings recorded there in 1865 that do appear to have disappeared. It is possible that this cave was too small for use by the monks, and I did actually come across quite a lot of stories online where people had tried to find it and couldn't. So you do think on one hand that would make it quite a good hiding place if it's difficult to find, but on the other hand it didn't sound like it would have been big enough to really have been used as a resting place. So it's possible that the Kylo Hills one is more likely the actual location of Cuddy's Cavern. Now our next story, the cave, is a lot easier to find, and this is Peak Cavern or Peak's Hole at Castleton in Derbyshire, and it's also known as the Devil's Arse. Somewhat unsurprisingly, they did decide to rebrand it and start referring to it by its slightly more cheeky name, and apparently visitor numbers went up. So I think that tells you a lot about the kind of people who like to go looking around things related to folklore. But one famous tale associated with this cave takes place on a cold winter's day, and that bit's important to the story. So a swineherd working for William Peveril, the owner of nearby Peveril Castle, went looking for a missing sow who was about to give birth. Now he assumed that she must have wandered into the cave, and he didn't really want to follow her because he'd heard the legends about the cave. And there used to be all these kinds of moanings and screamings and so on coming from the entrance, and he really wasn't very happy about the idea of going into the cave. But despite his trepidation about venturing inside such a cursed place, he also feared his master's wrath if he lost a valuable sow, so he bravely stepped inside. Now he managed to follow the cave as far as he could until he suddenly noticed daylight in front of him. Now he hadn't turned around, so it could only mean that there was another cave mouth on the other side of the cave. And he actually came out in a field where reapers were bringing in the harvest. The sow and her piglets lay under a tree where she'd quite happily given birth. So the swineherd took them back through the cave, sow and piglets all, and came back out into the Derbyshire winter that he'd left. This is obviously why it's important to bear in mind what the time of year was. Now, Jennifer Westwood and Jacqueline Simpson liken this story to that of the Green Children of Woolpit from Suffolk, with this idea of an other world which is operating according to very different seasons and times and so on than the world that we think we know. And indeed, the Lawmen actually cover the Devil's Arse in their podcast episode about the Green Children of Woolpit, so you can actually find more about that particular story there. But the common point of all of these particular stories is the idea of access points to the other world, seen as somewhat idyllic, although that seems to contradict the somewhat terrifying reputation of the Devil's Arse. Now, it was often considered the entrance to hell, with the howling of the wind thought to be the soul screaming in torment. So it does make you wonder if in this case it was more of a natural phenomenon which happened to lead to these ideas that the cave had some kind of nefarious association, or if indeed it was actually an entrance to the other world and the noises were perhaps intended to drive humans away. Who knows? Now, I wanted to include this next story because it does actually have an interesting link with treasure and so on, and that's Crocket's Hole in Gloucestershire, which you'll find near the top of May Hill outside Newent. And its name actually dates to the reign of Mary Tudor, because a Protestant named Crocket used to go to this particular cave with his friend to pray. Now, his friend was actually arrested for not attending Mass and was eventually burnt as a heretic in Priory House's courtyard. No one knows what happened to Crocket, though it is interesting that the cave is named after him and not his martyred friend. But other legends spoke of treasure hidden in the cave, although no one has ever found any. Or have they? Apparently, an elderly woman told researcher G.H. Piper in 1884 that she had played in the cave as a child, and her grandfathers had actually claimed to have seen the treasure in the cave. And they'd essentially gone crawling through a tunnel where they had actually found it on the other side of a stream. The problem was, they accidentally dropped their candle in the water, and such was their difficulty in getting out of the cave in the dark that they never went back into the tunnels to try and find the treasure again. Which is a little bit disappointing, but it does say a lot that this particular treasure wasn't just simply in the cave, it was also put in on the other side of a stream, making it even more difficult to gain access to. So you have to wonder, what was the treasure, why was it there, when did it date to, and is it still there? So if you're aware of this story, please do feel free to let me know. And I did tell you in the introduction that there is this weird quirk in English folklore, and I dare say it probably exists other places as well. It's just that's the one where I'm familiar with it from, with this idea that the devil somehow manages to affect the topography, usually because he throws something or he kicks something or he does something and he ends up affecting what the landscape looks like. And this is the reason why I've included Cheddar Gorge from Somerset, because Cheddar Gorge itself doesn't have the same number of cave stories that I was expecting that it would do, but it does have this association with the devil. And there was a legend that the Mendip Hills once apparently had a smooth profile, and the devil decided he wanted to ruin that. So he gouged out a deep chasm that we now know as Cheddar Gorge. And this legend also goes on to explain that local landmarks, such as Brent Knoll and the Flatholme and Steepholme Islands, actually came from the soil that he dug up to make the gorge. There is also quite a fun legend associated with Cheddar Gorge to explain where the cheddar cheese comes from. And in this particular legend, a milkmaid apparently left a bucket of milk in one of the caves to keep it cool. She forgot about it, and when she finally remembered to go and fetch it, it had turned into cheese, or the first cheddar. I think that story is highly unlikely to have happened, because if it had happened like that, somebody clearly would have taken the credit for it and it would probably have been named after them. So that's why I'm not sure about that one, but it is quite a cute little story anyway. And of course we can't discuss Cheddar Gorge and the caves without discussing the Cheddar Man, who was found in Goff's Cave in the gorge in 1903. Now they were actually working on the drainage at the time when they came across this male skeleton, who's roughly 10,000 years old, which places him in the Mesolithic era. Now, scientists actually studied his DNA, and in 2018, they announced that he had dark skin and blue eyes, not the light skin usually assumed before then. So he has actually given up quite a lot of secrets about what our ancestors looked like. And of course, if you are interested in Cheddar Gorge and its environs, then Wookey Hole lies some 6 miles southeast of the place, and you can obviously learn more about the folklore of Wookey Hole in my episode about the Witch of Wookey Hole. But I wanted to finish off with some caves in the Peak District, because obviously so far we've talked about treasure, we've talked about the idea of people hiding things in them or entrances to the otherworld and so on. But caves could also shelter otherworldly creatures as much as they could shelter humans, and these dark holes would have probably been quite welcome homes. And in the Peak District, one cave known as Hob's House in the Wye Valley had one of these unusual inhabitants. Now, the name Hob Hirst translated to giant's house, and in the 19th century, one story abounded that a giant-sized being lived there. The locals called him Hob, and he went up and down the valleys, thrashing corn and doing odd jobs around people's houses. No one ever saw or heard him in action, but they would leave a bowl of cream on the hearth as payment, in inverted commas, for his services. If he was in a good mood, Hob could make life go smoothly around the farm. But if someone annoyed him, the milk would sour, crockery would be smashed, and the cow's milk would dry up. Now this sounds a lot like a brownie, and indeed the name Hob Hirst can also refer to a fairy or an elf. The bowl of cream is left where it will be found, rather than being handed over directly, so it doesn't insult him. Now, a cave in Deepdale near Buxton was also called Thirst House Cave as far back as 1417, and people believed a goblin lived in the cave and they would use the nearby spring for its healing properties. As the legend ran, if you drank from this particular spring on the morning of Good Friday, it would cure all of your complaints. And finally, Thor's Cave lies in northern Staffordshire near the village of Wetton, and locals believe that fairies haunted this cave, including one Hob Hirst. This, they believed, explained the screeching heard in the cave. Now, I think it's quite notable that with these 3 caves in the Peak District, human remains from both the prehistoric and Roman era have been found in these caves. And I think that's quite interesting because people also linked Hob Hirst with prehistoric mounds and the spirits who lived there. So there seems to have become this association between caves used as a gravesite and then this brownie who could either help or hinder you depending on how well you treated him. It does make me wonder if in fact he was actually more closely related to some kind of ancestor spirit, given these places were used as grave sites, but of course we'll never really know. So what exactly do we make of these particular caves in British folklore? Well, ultimately I think the whole thing with caves is, because we generally aren't designed essentially to live underground, I think they do offer some kind of sense of mystery and indeed danger, because obviously when you consider how, some of them may suffer from rockfalls, you don't always know where tunnels are going to go. You don't know if you go in, if you'll be able to come back out or anything. They are quite dangerous places, so it's hardly surprising that we would have all these legends about strange things going on in them. But because people are less likely to go into them, they also make these phenomenal hiding places, which obviously we did see with the Smugglers' Caves a couple of weeks ago. So I do think that the idea of putting treasure in them, and of course this is one of the reasons why I did want to mention the Caves of Drac in Mallorca, because they were supposed to have a dragon garden treasure in them. It's this idea that you could hide things in them that other people wouldn't necessarily go looking for. But then these stories smash into these other tales of otherworldly creatures that live in these caves, and you then end up with all kind of weird senses of, well, is it the dragon's treasure? Is it the brownie's treasure? Etc, etc. And I do think that the fact that a lot of these caves were also used as burial sites, either intentionally or otherwise, does say a lot about the way that people actually used caves both as a means to enter the underworld, but also as these almost sacred spaces as well, which is why I think it's quite interesting when you have tales like the Robert Bruce one with the spider, that is a place to hide out. He chooses one of these quite liminal places where it's an open space you can move around in, but it's still underground. So that, I think, is quite an interesting little link there. Please do let me know what you think. As I say, we will do another subterranean folklore month at some point next year, because there's so many other caves to feature. There's so many other types of caves as well. So there's just so much that we can actually have a look at. So I hope that I'll see you at some point next year for that. I also hope that I'll see you on the 12th of December, because I will be doing a talk with Cresswell Crags on weather folklore. So I've been going off and digging up a whole load of new weather sayings and so on. As always with Cresswell Crags talks, they are free, but obviously donations do go to help with the upkeep of their site. And that's mainly why I didn't include Cresswell Crags in this particular episode, because obviously they're some of the most famous caves that we've got, really, and obviously with them all having the witch marks and everything in them. But I just thought like they kind of deserved an episode on their own. So again, I'll probably look at them more in depth next time, and hopefully by that point I'll have had a chance to actually visit them in person, because they're a bit far away from me. But anyway, next week we are moving into a Christmas theme of sorts, because we are going to have a look at Christmas plants, or at least plants associated with Christmas. Now, I have done holly and mistletoe before, so we will be having a look at the likes of ivy and pine trees and so on as well. So I'm going to be doing, as I say, seasonal folklore, but you know, not trying to make it too cheesy and Christmassy, because I'm not really feeling it. So that's what we're going to be having a look at. And also, I should point out that the bonus episode for this month, if you are a member of the Fabulous Folklore family on Patreon, is actually exploring the legends and folklore associated with Edinburgh's vaults as well, particularly in Southbridge. So that's what we're going to be having a look at. So if you are interested in things like that, then obviously please do feel free to come and join the podcast for £3.50 a month. And A, you'll help me keep it going, and B, you'll get access to 30 odd episodes. I can't remember how many there are now, but it's like 37 or 38, and all the other bonuses as well, such as like little mini storytelling episodes and exclusive articles and whatnot as well. So there's plenty on there to keep you occupied over the Christmas holiday. But anyway, I will let you go, and I'll see you next week when we start to have a look at the folklore associated with ivy. Cheerio. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, feel free to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, because that helps other people find the show too. It also takes between 4 and 6 hours to research, write, record and edit these episodes, so if you want to help support my time in doing that, then you can buy me a coffee, or you can join the Fabulous Folklore family on Patreon and enjoy extra benefits, including exclusive episodes and articles and even illustrated talks. All the links you need are below, and thanks in advance.